Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Blues Raga guitar series. We're going into another video in this mini-series about the DNA phrases of the blues. This video we're going to go into all the details of the minor chord phrases. I'm going to show you how to work the minor chord phrases into the pentatonic scale, and I'm going to give you what I call the master DNA exercises, which is an incredibly useful exercise in how to work these phrases into your playing so they feel really natural when you improvise with them. It's probably my favorite exercise I've ever discovered, so hope you guys find it useful. First thing I got to do is clear up a slight lie that I told in the last video, which is that I said there were 3 types of chord phrases. Well, in a way, there's kind of 6, because there's a major and a minor form of the blues. The way that these phrases act in the minor and the major pentatonic scales is quite different, so I find it's really useful to kind of just almost think of there as being 3 types of phrases, but then a major and a minor form of each one. And we're going to take care of half of those phrases. We're going to take care of all the minor phrases in this video. And the first thing we're going to do is clear up some theory issues. I'm just going to get a few small things out of the way, and then we're going to go into all the details of how to play a whole bunch of different forms of these minor pentatonic phrases, and then we'll do the master DNA exercise at the end. So yeah, use the lesson navigator below if you are able to find it useful. It'll help you get throughout the video to the parts that you want to get to the most, so feel free to use that. And yeah, let's jump into the theory stuff. The reason I'm starting with the minor pentatonic is because I feel it stands alone a little bit more strongly than the major phrases. Ultimately, a really good blues player, any serious blues player, mixes the major and the minor phrases all over the place. But at the beginning, I feel it's a little easier to just play the minor pentatonic phrases just on their own without any other context. They just sound a little stronger. So we're just for no reason other than that, I'm starting with them. But what is going to happen here is I'm going to show you a lick in the minor pentatonic scale, a very simple one. And I'm going to show you where in the scale it sits best. Every single one of these licks kind of has a place in the scale where it sounds most natural. And this whole thing is about figuring out where those places are and the specific techniques to play them, and then expanding them out to all the different parts of the scale. So no matter where you find yourself, you've got good licks to play anywhere on the entire guitar neck. And eventually this kind of playing starts to sound a little bit boring. It's really good when you're starting out, and it's going to enable you no matter how advanced of a player you are. But eventually we're going to get into some strategies for kind of stretching these phrases into more interesting places. But for now, it's really good to master them in their most basic position, so you kind of learn how to do more creative stuff with them later and are not kind of reinventing the wheel of what other blues artists have done. So the whole goal of this video is, by the end of doing this master DNA exercise and just jamming on it a little bit, you should feel pretty comfortable just playing stuff anywhere without any backing track, without any chords, without any bass player or anything. And it should sound like really good, solid blues melodies, like kind of the intro doodle that I played for this video was just pure minor pentatonic phrases, and it should sound like really core bluesy like that. It should feel really concentrated and just like intense, bluesness, without any other special dress ups or anything. That's the whole goal of this. So yeah, let's get into the phrases. So we're going to start out with these minor bends or these minor blurs. Like I said in the last video, these are probably the most characteristic phrases of the blues. All you have to do is play them with the right melodic weight in the phrase, and they'll come across. A lot of players who don't know how to bend things, or like if you're a trumpet player who doesn't know how to lip, or if you're a piano player who doesn't have the right kind of sliding key tricks, they'll just play 2 notes. And if you play that the right way, often this lick will come across. But if you can get the slides and the bends, they have a lot more blues vibe in them, so we're going to focus on those here. We're going to be playing in this A minor pentatonic box, sort of the root box for the pentatonic scale, the minor one, so we're up here on the 5th fret. I'm going to assume you know that a little bit before we go into this. The way this lick is mostly played, you'll start on the root of the scale, so in this case it's on an A, and it's going to be between the A and the C, the root and the minor third of the scale. You do something to play the A so that the sound of the A is established. Then you play the C, then you kind of bend it up a little bit. It's almost like you're bending it up to the next fret. You're kind of bending it from the minor third into the major third. This is that blurring from below I was talking about. So it looks kind of like this. There's there's a couple of ways that beginners will often do this that don't usually work as well. One thing that a lot of people try to do is go, which sort of works, but if you bend it not, it ends up sounding kind of weird. So what I generally tell people to do is bend it. You kind of let this, when you get to the C, you lay on it for just an instant and then start to bend up. And then you try to release the note before it comes back down. You don't want it to come back down into, you usually don't want it to like come all the way back down to the C. So again, you hit the root note to establish it, hit the third, but you only give it just an instant to sit so that it gets in your ear, and then you kind of pull yourself out of it into the major third, and then release back down to the root, just like this. And I found with a lot of my students, that takes some getting used to. But if you get really good at doing that, then you can find you can screw with this lick a lot later, and a lot of things will sound really good. But that particular way of playing that bend, where this, this C just gets an instant of daylight. See how it just gets that very, very, very short time where it sits on the C before it bends up. That really just makes this lick, in my opinion. And I think if you really get to playing it that way, you'll find it works really well in your playing. So once you've gotten used to doing that on the root of the scale between the A and the C, it also works between an E and a G, anywhere you find it. So if I go up onto my A string, I'm on the 5th fret, this is the 7th fret of the A string and the 5th fret of the D string. So you see now I'm doing this lick kind of across strings now. It's on the A and the D string, but it still works. See, it sounds very similar to down here. So what you're going to want to do eventually is find all the E's and the G's and do the licks there, and find all the A's and the C's. Because anywhere where there's a root and a fifth in the scale, this lick kind of hangs off the stable notes in the pentatonic scale, which are the root and the fifth, and it bends sort of a note a third above them. And there's one kind of exception to this, that when you bend off of the root, sometimes it resolves up to the fifth. It's a little less common, and it's also a little trickier to play, because in this case, if you do it down here on your, when you bend up, you're kind of bending right into the string that you want to have this finger wind up on. So that's definitely a little trickier, but if you want to do some more advanced stuff, try to get that to work out a little bit, where you resolve that bent note up to the 5th degree of the scale, which is the E, rather than resolving down to the root again. And also, in a way, you can kind of slide over the 2nd degree of the scale, which is not really in the minor pentatonic, but you can kind of go. That's another way to play this lick, but I want to save that for another video just to kind of keep this organized. I'm going to try to hang all these phrases on notes that are just straight in the minor pentatonic, so we'll get to that form of this later, but just realize that's sort of there for later on. So another really important way these thirds licks show up is what I call the compound blues third, which is kind of like the blues third of the blues third. The way I said that these blues thirds tend to hang on the root and the 5th degree of the scale, well, when you get into more advanced blues melodies, they start to hang off of the blue notes already. If C was your kind of unstable note in that lick, well, eventually it's going to start to hang this note is kind of the blue third of the C, and eventually you start to get licks where you go. In fact, I shouldn't even say eventually. That's actually a very, very common lick. It's just, it sounds a little bit more complex to the ear, because to get that, you have to play this E flat right here, and this E flat is a really dissonant note in A minor pentatonic. But you'll notice anyone who teaches you the pentatonic scale for the blues almost always puts the E flat in there at that part of the scale, and they call it the blue note. And in my opinion, this is the way that you actually use that blue note. It's not just saying, oh, it's a note in a scale. There's specific licks that it's a part of, and this is the biggest one. Usually the way I play this, I usually don't play this with the bend. I usually don't do that right in part of the minor pentatonic scale, because it kind of destabilizes the scale. So what I typically do is I'll start with a finger right on the E flat, go down down through the D, the C, and then the A. I'll literally just walk it down to the root. You know, and there's some different ways to do that. You know, I really like to slide over that one, or you know, you can even just slide into it, but kind of lay on it a bit. You know, any of those ways that you kind of like mess with this note and then wind up down at the root are going to work really, really well. And if you really want to be adventurous, you can just bend through it like that. That definitely is getting, you know, it's a little more difficult to do technically, and it definitely sounds a little bit more outside, but it's definitely workable. And so basically, you look for that lick anywhere you have a root. You're looking for the note that's a tritone above it. And then you're kind of walking down through this shape to the root. So the notes are E flat, D, C, and A. And when you start to get to like artists like Stevie Ray Vaughan, he'll actually transpose this to the fifth as well. So just the way you had like a blue note off the root and the fifth, you can have a compound third off the root and the fifth. So the compound root off the fifth actually gives you the flat 9 of the scale. To get down to this E, you have to go, the note a tritone above is actually a B flat, which is a flat 9 in the scale. It's kind of a weird note, but I mean, you're gonna see, you know, advanced blues rockers do this lick all the time, you know, and it's the same as the one below. You start on the B flat, kind of walk down through the A to the C, no, that's the G, and then the A. It's going B flat, A, G, E. Let me say that one more time to make sure I got it right. B flat, A, G, E. So anywhere you find those notes in your pentatonic scale, you can do those licks. You can do it going down to the root or going down to the fifth. And you can kind of just like walk it down through a scale like pretty flat. Just the weight of that note, how dissonant it is, will make it sound like a core phrase, but often I like to kind of do this trick where you kind of slide with your, you kind of use your arm to slide a little bit. You keep your hand pretty stable and just let your arm slide. It's a really, really good way to play this lick. So yeah, that's the biggest things you need to know about the blues thirds. So the next really important type of lick we're doing is these chromatic walks. And this is another example of a really good way to use the blue notes in the scale, but this is going to add a couple of notes that aren't normally considered, you know, when the blues scale is taught. It's going to add a few notes to even that. The biggest way that you find the chromatic walks happening in the minor pentatonic is filling in whole steps. Anywhere there's a whole step, anywhere there's only one little note between two notes of the minor pentatonic scale, you just fill it in with one note. So if your minor pentatonic scale looks like this, if you look straight on the strings, there's a little block here of 3 strings that each have your 1 and your 3 fingers on each string. And that single step in between each one of those notes, that's the note that you fill in. So you go. Now in this box it's really easy to see, but when you get to other boxes, what you want to look for is in the minor pentatonic, you want to fill in the space between, this is the 4th degree and the 5th degree of the scale, so it's the D and the E. So you're going to go D, D sharp, E. Anywhere you have that, you can use this lick. And you can use it to connect the 7th and the root. So this is a G, you can go G, G sharp, A. And you can also use it to fill in between the 3rd and the 4th. So this is the C, and it goes C, C sharp, D. And you can kind of do that ascending or descending. You can go down too. I tend to think that it sounds a little easier on the ear going up, but people use this going down a lot as well. And a couple ways you can go a little bit more advanced with this than just that basic way of playing the lick is you can figure out some kind of weird cross-stringy ways to play it. Because this way of playing this lick with this sort of block here in the minor pentatonic root box is really, really easy. But often these lines won't show up in such obvious places. Like if you go, you know, this note right here is, you know, you might see this as being outside of the minor pentatonic box, and it kind of is. You know, this is kind of where the box is, and this note is technically outside it. But if you go, it's kind of connecting this note to this note, and then the next note is on the next string. So that's a little harder to see. And then on this string, it gets even wackier because if this is a G right here, I said we could connect the 7th and the octave, but to get that note, the G sharp, we have to go G sharp. We have to stretch outside the box, and then get to this note. Now, if you've played wider scale boxes, that shouldn't be too hard. But for a lot of people, just getting used to doing that stretch might take a little getting used to. But it's definitely doable. So if you want something more advanced to do with this lick, look for that. Another way that this lick is really, you need to know how to use this lick, is how to kind of fragment it into smaller pieces, because this lick doesn't always occur in its whole block. Very often, it'll just be a leading tone. Or, it's very common for blues artists to just take those spots where the whole steps occur and just use one leading tone going into it, or going up or down. It starts to sound a lot cooler that way, and this is a technique that gets used in jazz a lot. Once you start to get to jazz, they'll start to use this idea of chromatic walks and kind of fragmenting it into just using one step to get into something, but they'll use it darn near anywhere they want. They'll use it on any wacky scale degree they can. And it gets a little bit farther from the blues sound because it tends to emphasize other notes of the scale that are outside the minor pentatonic. But it's a big part of how blues has expanded into other styles. So what you want to start to look for is, once you've gotten those basic walks down, and once you're comfortable improvising them, try to figure out how you just use 2 notes out of that. Or see if you can make up some licks using that, because that in a way it's still part of this core lick. The fact that the ear is so used to hearing these 3 notes, hearing those notes together, it's then a little more okay with hearing just 2 of those 3 notes together and using them in a larger context. And in a way, it's still part of that concept of chromatic walks. And they still tend to occur in the same places in the scale. So look for that as much as you can, and when you want to get into more adventurous improv ideas, look for that idea of fragmenting this lick. So the last type of core phrase we get in the minor pentatonic scale are these pentatonic 4th boxes. And again, they're a little trickier to articulate than the other types because it's just a way of using the pentatonic scale. In my recipe for blues juice concentrate, the lesson on how to analyze for blues influence, I'm going to get into a little bit more of how you use the pentatonic scale to indicate blues stuff. But for now, the thing we're just focusing on is, like, what are the ways that blues artists use the pentatonic scale that you just can't miss? Now, the biggest thing you're going to see is that these 4th boxes, they tend to kind of be the nest for bigger licks. People tend to take the other 2 types of licks I showed you and kind of nest them inside of the basic 4th licks I'm going to show you here. So they get used less in their own right, but there's a couple of ways that these show up just on their own. So I'm going to start with those, and we'll go from there. The biggest place I've ever seen this show up in this really old shuffle lick. I'm sure you guys have heard that if you listen to any early blues types thing, even anything before the 1950s, it was just very, very common. Or the 2 ways to play it are you going up, starting on the root of the scale, going through the 7th and to the octave. And the idea is this is kind of a top-weighted lick. You're kind of starting on this note and going up towards the octave. But you can do the exact same lick weighting the bottom of the 4th. You can start on the top note, You can see the lick can go in both directions. And very commonly what this lick is used to do is to kind of emphasize one of the major notes of the scale. In blues harmony, the big chords are the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. Well, this lick can be used to kind of lean on any single one of them. These 4th boxes occur in 2 major places in this scale, at least this particular shape of it. When you're going up from the 5th to the root, you have the E, the G, and the A. And when you're going up from the root to the 4th, you get A, C, and D. You can use all the same licks on A, C, and D. Have that E, the G, and the A, you can use the licks. Anywhere you have the A, the C, and the D, you can use the licks too. And it's less common, but you also have you also have a fourth lick that sort of circles the main notes. If you have your D, your E, and your G, you can kind of circle the fifths. This is kind of dancing around the middle note, but kind of landing on it in the end. It's not quite as common. You can go G, E, D, E. That'll kind of lean on the fifth a lot. And you can do the exact same lick on the root. You have C, A, and G. So the other major thing I want to talk about with these fourth boxes is that there's two types of these fourths with different shapes, and those two different licks I just showed you fit in a different version of these fourth boxes. Every one of these fourth boxes is obviously, based around the interval of a fourth. There's a perfect fourth on the outside notes, but whatever the inside note is, it's different in different parts of the scale. So between the root and the fifth of the minor pentatonic scale, between the E, the G, and the A, on the bottom you have a minor third and then a major second on top of that. So between the E and the G, it's a minor third. It's one, 2, 3 notes. And then between the G and the A, it's 2 notes. So you got the minor third on the bottom and the whole step on the top. And it's the same thing between the root and the fourth. But when you're kind of circling around the fifth, when you're going, you're going to see in the major pentatonic scale, this shape is a little bit more common. It's got, between that bottom note, that's the whole step there, and then the minor thirds on the top. Same with the root. Whole step on the bottom, minor thirds on the top. So you want to be aware of which type of fourth box you're in. One of them I tend to call the one where you go, I tend to call that the minor fourth box, because I feel like that lick is really important in the minor pentatonic scale, and everyone knows there's no such thing as a minor fourth in terms of intervals, but in terms of these boxes, I tend to call it the minor fourth because it just works a little better in the minor pentatonic scale, and I tend to call, that one, I tend to call that the major fourth because, as you're going to see in the next video, the major licks that you use in the major pentatonic scale, they base around that shape where you have the second on the bottom and then the third on the top. So that's a thing to look out for. One other thing, I just want to suggest that you start to look for all the different ways that these fourth boxes get used, because they get very complicated, and I don't want to go into all of them. But one of my favorite things to look at actually is ACDC hooks. The band ACDC has this incredible ability to use core blues licks right in the hooks of their songs. And I think if you study those, you're going to see just how powerful these licks can be in just their simplest forms. It's one of the best places I think to look for how to use these licks. And as long as you bear in mind, okay, which type of fourth box is it? Is it a minor fourth box or a major fourth box? And is it kind of weighted on the top, the middle, or the bottom note? These are usually really good ways to help you remember what kind of lick is going on, and then just how you're using it at a particular time in a solo. And as long as you're just emphasizing the right notes, am I using this to emphasize the root or the fifth or whichever other note of the scale you're in, that will really kind of give you an understanding of what you're doing at any particular time. So now it's time to go into the master DNA exercise. And the whole idea of this exercise is it's a synthesis of all the things we learned about the DNA phrases and your scales. Just kind of like the way a DNA chain is a whole bunch of different chemicals in a very specific sequence. If every single one of these phrases is like a chemical and it goes in a different place in the sequence, it's going to go in certain parts of each scale that you learn. And so basically we're just going to hang the phrases on every part of the scale that they go on. And what I found is that this really unlocks improvisation, because it really connects all the theory we've done with your muscle memory so that you find yourself knowing where to play licks just everywhere on the neck. So as long as we know where to put the phrases in the right places, we should be in good shape. Things you really should know before you do this exercise: you got to make sure you know the scale you're working with. You got to make sure you know it really, really well. Again, I'm still staying in this sort of minor pentatonic root box, an A minor pentatonic. And in addition, if you can, it's really helpful to do the boxes naming all the notes, going like this. If you go A, C, D, E, G, A, C, D, E, G, A, C. And then doing that same thing going down. C, A, G, E, D, C. You get the idea. And it's also really helpful to kind of know what kind of scale degrees you're on. You knowing this is the root, this is the third, it's the fourth, the fifth, the seventh, the root again, the third, the fourth, etc. Making sure you can know the names of the notes and the scale degrees of each one of them going both up and down in the box. It's really, really, really helpful for this. It is quite a bit of work, but it will make this exercise make so much more sense because this is all about how the ear is going to perceive all these things. And the scale degrees tell you sort of how the ear is going to perceive a note, and the notes, just the names of the notes, kind of help you find things a little more easily when you're trying to figure out where to put the licks. So if you can, try to make sure you can do all that stuff and then get into this exercise. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the blurs, all the minor thirds, where they're supposed to go. The simple versions, remember, they go between A and C, between E and G. So we're just going to find every place in the box where that fits. There's another A here, so we're going to go. And then there's an E here, so we go. And here there's an A and a C. So usually I'll do all those simple blurs all in one thing. And I'll make sure I've got a really good, handle on that throughout the entire scale. And then we get into the kind of the compound thirds. Remember, those are going from the flat fifth down to the root. So we got this E flat here, going down through D, C, and A. And then we also hang one off the fifth. So there we go from the flat 2, which is B flat, A, G, E. So usually, to start out, I'll just play these as a scale because there's a bunch of ways to play them. I'll just go E flat, D, C, A, and then go E flat, A, C, D. And then E flat, D, C, A, B flat, A, G, E. Those are all the places where it goes there. And when you want to get more advanced, you can start, or try doing kind of that arm slide or the bend. Any of those ways can work too. So that's the way you kind of run that through the whole scale. Then we're getting into the chromatic steps. Remember, the basic way, we're just kind of filling in the natural whole steps that fit in these scales. And in this box, they all kind of fit right in there. They're easiest to play right there in that block right there. But again, if you want to look for the advanced ones, you want to look for anywhere there's, the third going to the fourth. So, anywhere there's a C going to a D. So we have A, there's a C there. So you gotta go C, C sharp, D. You either gotta stretch there or you gotta stretch back. C, C sharp, D. Then filling in the fourth to the fifth, D, D sharp, E. And then the seventh to the root, G, G sharp, A. Then we go back to the third, C, C sharp, D. Going from the fourth to the fifth, D, D sharp, E. And then the seventh to the root. This is another one that goes across the fret. So you go G, G sharp, A, or you can go G, G sharp, A. And then once we get up here, we're kind of going outside of the box, so I usually stop there with that. And then the last one is finding those pentatonic fourth boxes. And the main thing I want to do is try to look for that shuffle cadence as much as you can. You look for it between the root and the fourth, and between the fifth and the root going up. So we're looking for A, C, and D first. Got one there, so we can go. And then we can do the same thing between the root and the fifth. I guess this is the fifth and this is the root, so you can go. And then if you're back here on the root again, you can go back and again, A, C, and D, A, C, and D. And then up here, E, G, and A. And you'll notice when I'm going across the strings that's there, I can't usually do the hammer. you know. So I gotta either figure out I either gotta play that flat without any fancy articulation, or I gotta kind of slide in. You can always find ways to dress stuff up, but you'll find one of the interesting things about this exercise is how the different licks lay in different parts of the instrument, and it forces you to play it different ways. But that's part of what makes, you know, playing guitar fun, is that you find just all these really interesting ways that it lays on the neck in all sorts of different ways, and it helps you make it unique. So if you can find a way to work all those licks into the whole box, just like I did right there, just sequentially going up and finding all of the sets of notes that use the licks, and just kind of pounding them into the scale, then when you start to improvise, what you do is you do that whole exercise, you do the licks in all the places where they belong, and then you just start to play. All I did there was play licks that I just taught in this lesson. All I did was just a combination of the basic licks. But, you know, you can see how once you start to mix them up, if your fingers have done them in the exercise and you just start to jam on it and see where they come out, you'll eventually start to get used to using them and mixing them all up. And that's what starts to make the improvisation sound really fresh. So what I usually find is do a section of this, like if you just did the blues thirds. Do those real quick to refresh them in your memory, and then just start jamming on anything and see how they come out, see how well they come through. And as you start to get better at this exercise, you'll feel you're using them more confidently. You'll find them, you know, turning up in more interesting places in the solo. But if they're not quite coming through yet, it's because you don't have the basic exercise yet. So if you don't feel like they're coming through, go back and just do the whole, you know, whatever lick you're trying to do. Whatever lick you're trying to work on, just run it through in all the places it belongs first, and then go back into improvising again and see if you can start to work it into things. And yeah, that's the basic of how it works. The more you can kind of pull things from the sort of technical version of the exercise into improvisation, the more this is going to do for your playing. So the cool thing about these phrases is that they should work on any instrument. I'm showing you them on a guitar, but really the theory is the common element between all of these things. It's a very, very solid sounding set of phrases that they're really going to work, you know, on any instrument, and you should be able to do them also without anything else backing you up. Like I was saying, in the whole idea of the blues raga is that, you know, you could play this like a sitar player does it, which, you know, they'll just start playing the phrases completely on their own, no drummer, no other instruments playing, and they sound great. This is an incredibly cohesive sounding set of phrases, and they just, you know, they are incredibly flexible if you really get them down and working together. And what I find is the trick is to really getting them down in one position. You know, the way this video goes is it starts out just showing you the licks in just one place. You know, really getting that bend, that first blues bend, to work the way it's supposed to. I find that's really, really difficult for early players. But once they get it down, moving it to other places becomes a lot easier. And then once you've expanded it through one scale box, you try to expand it through all the other ones, and eventually it's just, you know, it's just free and loose in all your playing, and it's just a great asset to you. So what I generally recommend you do is, you know, as you start to do these licks in different parts of your scales, you'll eventually find they can travel to other places in the neck. You know, doing this, you know, bend here, you know, ends up being the same shape as doing that bend here. Your fingers are moving across the strings in the exact same way. So your muscle memory is going to carry this all kinds of new places for you, and it's a really, really safe bet if you use these melodies in your solos. You can either kind of guide yourself by muscle memory, you'll just find yourself someplace and be playing, and the licks will just start coming out. Or, you know, if you really want to kind of use the note stuff that you did, if you're like, oh, I'm on this note, what kind of licks are there? You know, that can help you find your way around as well. You know, there's a bunch of different ways that this exercise will help you orient yourself in different kinds of music. And the creativity is really going to become natural because your hand's got so many resources for whatever situation it's going to find itself in that it really feels free to start exploring, and you also have so much territory to explore. There's so much to do just to get these phrases to work over the whole neck that, you know, eventually you're going to find you don't have to worry about playing things like other players because, you know, there's, you know, there's just so many situations that you could wind up in that no one's ever encountered before, and you've just got to find your own way around them. It's a really good way to kind of develop your own sound. I really developed my sound through just messing with this exercise. And I really like where it's taken me. It's made me very flexible and working with a lot of other people. So I'd say just take it to the practice room and work with it a lot. And just to kind of close, let me see if I can give you a couple of tips for how to learn this whole exercise. The first thing I want to recommend is, as much as you can, try to figure this out on your own. I've kind of given you a template in this video for how to do it for a scale. See if you can figure out the other 4 pentatonic boxes on your own without using any guides that I give you. I will give some videos that you can use as cheat sheets, but the best way to absorb this is by working the logic out for yourself. If you use something else, if you use an outside resource and you just copy it, your brain usually doesn't remember things quite as well that way. Whereas if you really have to think through, oh yeah, this fits on this scale degree and this fits on these sets of notes in this key, it really improves your musical logic. And really, this is all about improvisation. To really be able to improvise, you really got to know the music by heart. One way that a lot of people will translate the word challon is actually as a heart phrase. They'll call it a core phrase or a heart phrase. I'm calling it DNA phrases here because I think it makes a little more sense to some people. But, really this stuff, you got to know it by heart. It's got to be in your bones if you're really going to jam with it. So the best way to do it is just to take the idea of knowing the basic phrases and where they fit in the scale and just trying to use your own understanding of that to work it through each scale. And then it's not bad to check someone else's logic, but even sometimes if that takes you off in a quote wrong direction, you might find it's a really good sounding wrong direction, and you might want to keep the ideas you discover. So definitely try to figure out as much of this exercise just using your logic as you can, and then spot check against my resources if you find you need them. And even if you only do this phrase in one box, just because you're like, I don't want to do all these scales, you just do it in one box. Usually the finger shapes will take you a lot of different places. I know people who have just done this in one box and built their whole style around just that small blues vocabulary, and it can work really well. So, any amount of this exercise you get done is really going to take you good places. So, don't worry if you don't get through all the boxes. Life's going to go on. You can still actually be a really good musician just having a small area of the neck really, really mastered. That can be quite good enough. So, and then once you eventually have done the whole thing and you're looking for other adventures, we'll have some later videos about how to stretch these core phrases to new and interesting places. So that's coming up, but your main homework is, know the 5 pentatonic boxes, know them like the back of your hand, know where the notes are, know which scale degrees belong to each note, and make sure you do those 3 types of phrases in all 5 boxes over the entire neck of the guitar, and try to do it without copying off a video. And when you start to get bored of just doing note exercises, just start jamming, because every time you work through this exercise, you have to figure out a way to pull the phrases into improvisation. And for me, the way that happens is, I would just start playing, and see what I could pull out. But if I'd done things in an exercise, they were at least there for me. My muscle memory had them somewhere in its log of things that it knows how to do. And once you just start playing, eventually it just starts working its way into how you play things. So the exercise kind of like sows the seeds, but really just jamming over it really is what grows the phrases into your playing. So do a little bit of exercise, jam a little bit, do a little more exercise, and that's how you kind of grow the whole thing into a really, really solid blues vocabulary. And that's the main things you need to know about the Minor Master DNA exercise. The next video we're going to do the major phrases, the phrases for the major pentatonic. And then we're going to go on to kind of how to combine the major and the minor licks all together and build more complex phrases, and all the other adventures of the Blues Raga guitar series, the kind of like the 12-note how to get out of any wrong note exercise. Well, that's all coming up. Many, many good things still coming up. So stay tuned, keep the faith. Peace, everybody.